if I asked you to think of a BMW 3 Series with a V8 engine in it, then you would probably instinctively call to mind the E36 M3, wonderful car that it is. Perhaps you might think of the slightly earlier E36 M3 GTR that raced particularly in America. But before either of those, there was this, the Alpina B8 4.6.
With its naturally aspirated engine and manual gearbox, this might just be the greatest Alpina ever built. And yet, it is also a car that BMW said couldn't be done.
A V8 in the E36? No, that's completely impossible.
But despite the enormous size of the engine, Alpina found a way. So, from vintners to VIN numbers, we're going to tell the tale of this legendary car. This episode is driven by Hagerty, who, in case you don't know, provide car insurance that's designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. So, if you have a special car that you don't drive every day, like one of these perhaps, then take a trip to hagerty.com/Henry. Or pick up the phone, give them a call, and speak to a like-minded enthusiast about a quote. Now, before we head back to the mountains, it seems like a good idea to have a quick look around the Alpina factory and a chat to this gentleman.
Yes, my name is Andreas Bovensiepen. I'm the head of Alpina here in Buchloe.
The origins of Alpina can be traced back to 1962, when Andy's father, Burkhard, swapped Solex carbs for Webers on a BMW 1500, and then indulged in a bit of guerrilla marketing.
He could not afford the booth in the Frankfurt Motor Show, so he went only on the big parking spot. It was called the Rebstock parking spot, and he put the first 100 leaflets under the windscreen wipers of BMW 1500 drivers. And he said, if you like one of the fastest cars in a BMW, like a touring car, buy my carburetor kit and you have a sports car.
After that, Alpina went from strength to strength, going racing with huge success and some pretty famous names doing the driving.
Niki Lauda was leading the race on the Nürburgring, and then my father had the idea, oh, the cars, they are completely dirty, both cars. We should do a pit stop, clean the cars and go out again. And Alpina was one of the first teams who had a radio in the race cars, and my father talked to Niki Lauda. Oh, Niki, we like to do before the last lap. We like to do a pit stop to clean the cars quickly. We are fast enough. We have a long distance between the third, so come in and clean the car. And he said, "Oh, Burkhard, you are completely crazy. What we are doing, if we are not anymore able to start the car because a lot of every part is hot and maybe it could ruin our race completely, I will get my full wages for the victory still if we don't succeed then." And the engineers told my father, "You are completely crazy, we cannot risk it." And then finally my father said, "Okay, we don't do it."
Alpina moved onto this site in 1970, and many of the original buildings are still in use today.
Where did the blue and green come from?
So finally the blue was always a good color for Gran Turismo cars and a good color on cars, and the green came more or less from racing. When we raced with Batmobile, we had a sponsor, an Austrian brewery, Gösser, and so we had a green car because it had as well green, and so finally it flew into. So then we said, it's good to have two colors, but this is not the green of the cars. The green of the cars is much darker. This is a racing green.
And here are a few other facts you might not know.
The name Alpina actually came from Andy's grandfather's business, which sold typewriters and office equipment. Love the script on it, with the A designed to look like a mountain. The badge has actually changed a few times over the years, so the basic layout stayed the same with the roundel with Alpina and then the shield in the middle, but what's on the shield has changed. So here, for example, you can see instead of the crankshaft we have today, you've got a camshaft in there instead. Alpina also has a very successful wine import and supply business. It started when Burkhard, travelling all over Europe with the race team, used to fill the race trucks with wine on the way back from races. Since 1983, when it became an independent manufacturer, every Alpina has had its own VIN number with the letters WAP at the start instead of BMW's WBA.
It's not all been one-way traffic from Munich to Buchloe, however.
We are working since 2011 in supporting BMW in engineering, especially mainly suspension setups, springs, dampers, anti-roll bars, then the calibration of the electric dampers and anti-roll bars, and the whole DSC system is a very big part as well. And we have a group of about 30 engineers who makes all BMW Group products, from Mini to Rolls-Royce, setting up suspensions or DSC systems.
So it's a close relationship. And although Alpina has produced a lot of its own cars over the years, they have always neatly complemented BMW's products, rather than stepping on its neighbours' toes. There have been some amazing models, like the B7S Turbo, the E34 B10 Biturbo, and the Roadster V8. But arguably, none has been more iconic than the B8 4.6. A couple of hours to the south of the factory, just over the border in Austria, this is the Hahntennjoch Pass.
I love this section of the road. It reminds me of sort of, I suppose, Rally Monte Carlo or perhaps San Remo, with these rock faces and the huge drops just over there. They produced just 221 of these between 1995 and 1998, which means it's obviously a pretty rare car. The convertibles are the rarest of all, but I think this coupe looks fantastic. They did do a touring version as well, which could be the absolute ultimate in many ways.
Today we've actually got not one but two coupes, both owned by Alpina devotee Daniel Olderwemmer. And despite the naturally aspirated engine and manual gearbox, the first impression is that the B8 4.6 is still very much an Alpina.
You never get the feeling that this is trying too hard. It doesn't shout to impress, it doesn't feel like it needs to have super quick steering. It's just got performance in abundance and this amazing, friendly, easy character. It's not trying to be an M car. It's sort of more grown up than that somehow.
But how did this car come about? Well, it all started with a meeting at BMW in the early 1990s to plan for the coming year.
We started the project, it got momentum, and on a certain extension we had at least one yearly meeting with the head of development for our future discussions with the products. And my father told Mr. Reitzler, the head of development of the time, "Oh, we have investigated the V8 engine and the E36. We like to make a very elegant, luxury, small-sized car." And Mr. Reitzler said, "A V8 in the E36? No, that's completely impossible. Our engineers have checked it. That won't work." And my father said, "Oh, let's do a bet. For a case of nice wines or something." And Reitzler said, no, we don't need to bet, because I know it won't work, because there's the crash structure from the front bumper to the rear, and when we fit the engine and the cylinder heads are too wide, they won't pass the crash structure. And the funny thing was, finally, both are right, because Dr. Reitzler was thinking of the marriage like you do it in an assembly plant, where the engine comes from the lower side and up, and this was not possible due to the crash structure. But Alpina put the engine from the top, and then it was possible.
Initially, they thought that the standard all-aluminium 4-litre M60 BMW V8 would suffice. But after driving a prototype, well...
At the time I was working at BMW in suspension development, but still I had the possibility to drive the test cars, and I was immediately of the opinion, and others as well, we have very high expectations, but the car is not not as opulent as we thought. The torque, it was not the kind of wafability you would say maybe today, to speak in Rolls-Royce words. So we said immediately, oh, we should put in the 4.6, and then we did the 4.6, and this was really convincing.
5 B8 4 litres did actually get built, just for the Japanese market, because the importer didn't want to wait, but the rest got the full-fat 4.6.
Yes, and here is the huge 4.6 V8 engine. If you see it here, with the gearbox completely, it's really huge. And yeah, it was very important because the E36 3 Series has a rack and pinion steering, so we need to develop a complete new oil sump system, including oil pump.
Was that made by, there was a cinema camera company?
Yeah, cinema camera from Munich. It's called Ari, and yeah, they have the experience in casting thin aluminium parts, or had the experience at the time. So the oil pump was done, was casted by them. And of course, still here you see the rack and pinion steering, yes, still beneath the oil pump. The oil pump is in front. And so this was a lot of parts to design new that this could fit into the car.
The body in white needed 42 changes to make the big V8 fit, and the work was carried out by BMW at their factory before delivering the chassis to Alpina. And that 4.6 litre engine? Well, the Nickersill liners meant the 4 litre couldn't be bored out, so BMW cast a special block just for Alpina.
I mean, just think about that now. Going to BMW and saying, I've had this great idea, but you're going to have to do it, and then we're going to sell it under our badge. It's mad.
But that's really what happened.
The end result of all that is 333 horsepower at 5,700 RPM. But the more important figures are those of the torque, because the power, it's only a little bit more than, well, E36 M3 Evo. The torque, however, much greater. So we've got 347 pounds-feet of torque at 3,900 RPM. However, perhaps even more crucially, at just 1,000 RPM, with 258 pounds-feet of torque. And that's exactly the same as the maximum put out by an E36 M3 Evo. All that torque low down means it's very easy to short shift, or on the Autobahn, leave it in 6th and it will cruise along very happily. It gives this car a very Alpina character. You think of, well, 3 Series with a V8 stuffed under the bonnet from this generation, and you think it's going to be absolutely sort of muscle bound, some sort of total hot rod, really anathema to what you think of when you think of Alpina with turbocharging and the Switchtronic automatic gearbox. But this really is still very faithful to the sort of the Buchloh, I suppose, ethos and character.
It has that lovely understated Alpina look too. Inside, there's really just a bit of blue and green stitching, and of course the blue dials. And outside, yes, there is a new front bumper and a low rear wing, but they're a bit of Botox, not a full facelift. There are no M twin spar mirrors, or flared arches, or a big bonnet bulge. Just the decals. And of course the wheels, which are an Alpina hallmark to this day.
From racing, it was known that 20 spokes is more or less an optimal thing to get a very light wheel. And this was still a 14-inch wheel from 1973. And still the tire looks like the Michelin XWX, looks like an original tire from that time. So yes, this is
almost looks like a gravel rally tire now.
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, and the idea was quite quickly not to change with every model the design of the wheels, only to further make some evolutions out of it. And here we can see one evolution. Of course, here this looks like at least a 20-inch wheel. Yes, that's a 20-inch. We like to have a very clear design with a casted wheel without a valve on the outside. So we place the valve here inside and the air goes through the spoke into the tire. And this is completely unique to Alpina wheels. There's nobody else who makes fake wheels or whatever. Sometimes we have it with Alpina as well, but this nobody does because it's too complex.
And that mixture of both reserved elegance and raciness is definitely present in the way the B8 4.6 drives.
However, much as it's happy to be left down low, when you do rev it, then you find its voice, and it is quick. It really sort of picks up around 3,500 RPM. I'd say it's really done by 6,000 RPM. You don't need to rev it all the way out, but boy is the performance there.
0 to 60 takes 5.5 seconds, and flat out it'll do 175 miles an hour.
It feels strange being in an Alpina and not having the little sort of buttons behind the spokes here for an automatic gearbox. Incidentally, that Switchtronic box was actually the first auto that you could really shift yourself. Alpina beat Porsche and its Tiptronic to the punch with that.
Alpina would have put an auto in this, but it wouldn't fit. And talking of Porsche gearboxes,
the gearbox is a 6-speed Getrag gearbox, and actually to me in shift terms it feels almost more sort of Porsche 993, sort of that era, obviously the same kind of era as this, than the more knuckly feel that you get in an E36 M3.
And what about the handling?
With such a big engine under the bonnet, you might think that it feels really, well, imbalanced, front heavy, but not a bit of it.
Because like for like, the V8 is shorter than the B3's straight 6, and because the V8 was moved as far back as possible, and because there is a 30-litre bigger fuel tank in the back, the car has a damn near 50-50 weight distribution. It also helps that Alpina and Andy, who used to race both single-seaters and DTM by the way, also know how to set a car up.
I personally hate understeer, so the whole arrangement was done that the car drives nicely.
And it really does.
It's so relaxed and comfortable every day that you do wonder whether it will be able to sort of, well, all come together in terms of handling when you start pushing it. But it absolutely does. It just sort of shrugs it off nonchalantly. Sideways, you say? No problem, we can do that, absolutely. Don't need to shout about it, we'll just do a bit of oversteer if that's what you want.
And it doesn't even need modes to be great in different situations. Slowly or sideways, smooth or bumpy, the Bilstein dampers just work.
If this were a person, it makes me think of Ernie Els in his pomp, even now to be honest, because he's a golfer that has such an amazingly smooth, easy swing. He's known as the Big Easy, yet could hit the ball absolutely miles. It's that sense of effortless performance that this has.
Perhaps Juha Kankkunen would be a driving equivalent.
I love that this car feels so modern. I mean, it's 30 years old this year. The whole company is 60 years old. This car is 30 years old. But it feels like you could happily use this every day today and not feel like you were missing out.
This is definitely not one of those cars that you would only take out on a Sunday morning. I really think you could and would use this all the time. It's certainly a car worth preserving, and that will be the job of the new Alpina Classic, which is what the company based in Buchloe is about to become.
BMW talked to us in 2021 and said, okay, the future is going electric, it will be much more electric, it will be much more difficult in the future for everybody to earn good money, because everything gets more software engineered and software engineering and gets more complex, and still the regulations get more and more strict. If it's pedestrians, if it's some supervising systems in the car. And but you guys have a really cool brand with a great history, and we would be interested to buy your brand.
The prospect of an electric future just didn't chime with Andreas, so after much thought, he decided to sell the Alpina brand, but not the company, to BMW, and become Alpina Classic, looking after its heritage and servicing the 40,000 or so cars that remain from the 60,000 they have built since 1965, including, of course, the magnificent B8 4.6.